She's
Or
gonna.
will-
I can record right now.
Ooh, perfect.
You're good to go.
Thank you.
All right, I'm putting you guys on mute. Hear myself.
Let me wait. Go back to pinning you. Why is it not pinning you? All right, that's fine.
And I will start my 20-minute clock when we start the presentation. Oh, there she is.
Do any of you need ability to film, or are you good to go? Lindsay, you're recording and you're good to go. Okay.
Molly's recording, but yeah, we're good.
Say what?
Molly's recording us, but we're good.
But you're good. All right.
Yep.
Have a nice time.
Okay. I will begin the presentation about urban boat builders now. So back in 1995, a group of 10 or 12 of us, guys and gals, were having a hamburger and beer fest and started talking about wooden boat building, which we all love to do. And so we said, why don't we set up an organization? So we proceeded to get the tax-exempt nonprofit status so that we could get grants. We registered with the state of Minnesota as a nonprofit organization, and we hired a first part-time executive director. And so that was in 1995. Over the next year and a half or so, we realized that we were hoping adults would take part in our wooden boat building classes, but they didn't succeed because most adults want to use aluminum or fiberglass boats. So then we met again over hamburgers and beer in the backyard. And in 1997, all of us were organizing and working in low-income communities and communities of color. So we decided there's a lot of youth who need help. So why don't we aim this instead at youth and only incidentally to adults? So we did that. We mostly knew the kids that were so-called at-risk kids, so about the ages of 15 to 20. Most of them were kids who were failing in school or were dropping out of school, in danger of dropping out of school. And we came up with our first purpose statement aimed at youth called Building Youth, One Boat at a Time. And we've lived according to that statement ever since 1997. Initially, we had male teenagers, mostly African American, Hmong, and Vietnamese. I should say that there were a few girls in the program early on, but initially it was mostly males until about 2001. Those first programs were group boat building programs. So we either—
Sorry, can you repeat that? They were what programmers?
Our first programs were mostly group boat building programs.
Thank you.
So a group of students would gather either at their school or at our boat shop in St. Paul, Minnesota. And we would build between 9-foot to 15-foot wooden boats. So there would be 7 to 10 youth building one boat after school, 3 hours a day after school. And to participate, the youth needed to make a commitment to stay in school. So they could not join the program or they could not continue in the program if they dropped out of school. Plus, we discovered quickly that there were disciplinarian problems that our staff couldn't deal with. So every school or juvenile justice organization had to provide a staff person or more than one to handle discipline. These were good kids, but they were kids who were not accustomed to having limits placed on them. And we were using dangerous tools. So we needed someone to discipline them while our instructors taught them the skills. I should add here that after a week or 2 or 3, we didn't need the disciplinarian anymore because the kids totally got excited about the skills they were learning. In fact, so excited that when they would come first, we'd show them a pile of wood and a picture of a boat. And we'd tell them, you're going to take that wood and create that boat. And using rougher language than I'll use, they would generally say, no way. Within 2 to 3 weeks, they would run into my office because I was the executive director and say, Dave, come out and see what I'm doing. And those mostly boys at that point, few girls, would be so proud of the work they're doing. It was really important for them. So the program was designed to operate 3 hours after school, building these boats as part of a group. Our first major part, what we called partner organization, was Boys Totem Town in St. Paul, Minnesota. That's a juvenile justice residential site. So the boys, these were all boys, lived there while they were serving their time for whatever problem they had with the juvenile justice system. They became our first partner in 1997. And they stayed our partner, remained our partner until just 2 years ago, when Boys Totem Town was closed down as an old form of juvenile justice. And so they couldn't participate in the program. Other so-called partner organizations included a lot of charter schools, arts schools, regular public schools, programs for students with special needs like autism, physical impairments, etc. We've had 2 schools that serve students who are deaf or hard of hearing come in, and we brought in interpreters for that. We also work with community organizations like churches and community groups who can spend the money to pay urban boat builders to come and instruct, usually again, at-risk kids. So when urban boat builders would approach a school or a church or a community, we would say, we want to work with the students or the youth you are having the most problems with. The ones who are going to drop out of school, the ones who are not going to come to your church program, the ones who you're having trouble disciplining. Let those students come to our program. And what we would see, again, within 2 or 3 weeks, we would hear from the schools, the churches, the community groups, the juvenile justice organizations. What are you guys doing with these kids? Because they're completely changed. Now, one of the things we did try was working with even younger kids than 15. We actually went out and worked with 8 to 12-year-old kids in schools. They didn't use many dangerous tools, but we would cut things ahead of time and they would screw them together, and they made what we called rocking boats. So picture a baby's rocker that rocks. Well, that would be in the shape of a boat with a bow and a stern. So the front or the back of the boat. And then we would donate those, the kids would donate those to area childcare centers or to churches and daycare centers. Then the number of girls after 2001 began to increase. And again, coming from public schools, charter schools, juvenile justice programs for girls. And all of you will be interested in knowing that ever since then, girls, especially Hmong girls who come from a tradition of craft personship, I guess we would say, but girls in general were by far the better boat builders. They were way more careful. They measured twice before cutting once, whereas the boys would go in and not measure at all and just cut. We would refer to the boys as rammers because they rammed their way through the project, and the girls as thinkers and doers because they would think first and then do it. So urban boat builders began to expand, and we knew we wanted to work more with longer times with the youth because they would end a group boat building program and we would have nothing more for them. And the kids would plead with us, can we do another group boat building program? And we would say, no, we're sorry, new kids come in. So we decided that we were going to, oh, and we knew that these kids, most of the trouble they got into was to get money or something they could sell for money. And so we knew we also wanted to somehow attach money to it. So we designed a second step in the program. The first step was the group boat building. The second step was the apprenticeship program. And that worked 3 days a week for 3 hours after school. So 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., 3 days a week. And initially they earned, which was a good wage back then, $10 an hour. So interestingly enough, we ran into other problems with this because most of these kids never dealt with a bank, never dealt with how do you cash checks because they never dealt with checks. So we also had to do financial education to the kids. We had
Okay,
to
can you
call
stop
ahead.
for a second?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
We had to actually call ahead to the banks because twice when our youth came down at our urging to open a bank account, the banks called the police because they thought the youth were there to cause trouble. So we had to call a bank that was closest to us and work out an arrangement that when our tough-looking boys, and some of the girls were very tough-looking also, would come down, we would call ahead to tell the bank, 5 of our youth are coming to your bank for good reasons, and here's their names. And the bank would work with us then. By the way, the kids, of course, were hungry at the end of their school day. So we would invite their parents to bring food. The African-American, white, and Somali parents didn't bring much. The Hmong parents, bless their hearts, would bring huge amounts of food. And pretty soon, we realized we had a cross-cultural program going on because the Black kids and the Somali kids, kids were eating all this Hmong food that none of them had ever eaten before. So that was a fun part of it. Our apprenticeship program was aimed at 3 things. 1, we could expand the skills training for the boys and girls that were part of the program. And I should say here, not every youth that was part of a group program could be accepted in the apprenticeship program. We now knew them, our staff knew them. And so we could tell the students who really were just looking for the money versus the students who really were excited by the skills they were learning. And so we didn't invite some of the youth and did invite. The apprenticeship program was small so that out of each month, maybe we'd have 40 or 50 kids finishing a group boat building program. We would only invite, early on, we would only invite a few and up to 7 or 8 for the apprenticeship program. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, they earned money, and that became very important to keep them from doing things that would get them back involved with juvenile justice system. Plus, as apprentices, 3 days a week for 3 hours a day, so 9 hours total, we could mentor them about learning, about social stuff, about their gang involvement. To become an apprentice, if they had visible tats anywhere, they had to begin the process of eliminating those and getting them erased, or they couldn't stay in the program. So there was a lot of gang alternative learning that had to go on with these youth. We also provided a lot of tutoring, educational help. These kids, for the most part, are not traditional learners who use books. Like most of our Urban Boat Builders staff, I did okay learning from books. These kids learn better hands-on. And so they still had to deal with the schools, though, that expected book learning. So frequently at 6 o'clock, the kids would stay for another couple of hours, and our adult volunteers and staff would sit down with these young guys and young gals and help support them in their schooling. We were very proud that most of our apprentices, to this day, all of whom were suspected to be dropout potential, almost all of them have stayed in school. Not 100%, but more than 95% have stayed in school. We're very proud of that. The other thing we did is we gave these youth in this program some unique experiences. Once a year, they took the canoes or the boats they were building, and we guided them down the Mississippi River or up to the Boundary Waters canoe area in northern Minnesota. And they went on a boat trip with our staff and with a couple of adult volunteers. Remember, except for the Hmong kids, most of these kids not only have never been in a boat, they've never been much in the water, and none of them knew how to swim. So we had to teach them how to swim, how to use the boats, and then they went up either in northern Minnesota wilderness or from Minneapolis down to Lake Pepin, which is about, 3 hours south of us, but by river is 2 days, 3 days. And they'd camp at night. So we did that. And the other thing we did is we gave the youth the opportunity to talk about their work, the types of wood they were using, the woodworking skills they were demonstrating, the actual how they were doing things by going to public events. So Urban Boat Builders, you'll hear me call it UBB. I use that shorthand. So UBB would go out to the Minnesota State Fair and demonstrate boat building. We'd go to the annual St. Paul Great River celebration. We went to the Minneapolis Boat Show. We'd go to public school events where the kids were from those schools, and then other special events during the summer. And UBB would have these
Okay.
students. Yes,
Could you repeat that last one? You said the boat show. What was the last?
sure. Besides boat shows, then we would do public school events.
Okay,
That,
thank you.
yes. Most often, those are the schools the kids were from. And then special summer events around the lakes and rivers. And so we would school these kids, these young people, on how to talk about their work. And I have to tell you, it was so impressive to see how they were doing. By the way, it looks like I'm 3 minutes left. So we took these annual trips. During the winter, by the way, when the kids finished the boat, we wanted them to have the complete experience of starting with a pile of wood, finishing a boat, and then launching it and using it. Well, as you all know, in Minnesota in the winter, there's what we call hard water. It's ice. So we would rent a neighborhood pool, haul our kids in our canoes and our boats to the pool and launch them in the pool. The lessons we've learned so far is that troubled youth, at-risk youth, have huge potential capacity to learn. They just aren't given that opportunity in traditional schools. Second thing, families of these youth were most often, except in the case of the Hmong and Vietnamese, were broken families. One or more parents weren't home. I would say 60% of the boys and girls were being raised by grandmas and grandpas, most often grandmas, and they were very low income. We tried to involve the families, but we realized that the families either weren't interested, were too old to come, or were too busy working families, so we couldn't involve the families as much. Unions and organized labor became a problem. I'm a long-term labor advocate, but they did not want kids of color, boys or girls, coming in. We also would find ways that we could involve the kids coming in after the apprenticeship was over. We would open up on Saturdays and they could come in for tutoring or oftentimes just to talk to us about their girlfriends or boyfriends or the troubles they were having with their parents, etc. So we switched from just teaching boat building. So initially we were a bunch of boat builders that wanted to teach kids how to build boats. And then a little bit of learning on the side. We're now primarily a youth learning program, what we call a youth development program, using the means of building a boat. That's the 20-minute signal if you can hear it. So I will end the presentation at this point. And thank you for the interpreting.
Okay.
Do you want to stay because you're recording, or do we not need this part?
Do you mind staying, Molly, and just going off camera so you can take a break? So you can keep recording? Because I'm not sure. I don't know if we record this part. Okay. Thank you.
This is good for our portfolio.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I loved, that was so interesting. I mean, I read it, but that was so cool. I'm like, what can I do in my community?
I know it's
I
a
love
wonderful
nonprofit.
program. And you know, now around the country, there's these teenage programs. There's cookies, there's boat building. Around the country, we were the first one. And now there's all over the place. There's also other skills programs for kids. I know that here in the Minneapolis area, there's a sewing program. In fact, those teens, mostly girls in that case, were sewing masks for free for doctors and nurses. So there's wonderful programs. By the way, did I talk too fast?
No, I think you did great. And you did really awesome, like waiting when we asked for clarification. Because I know some people like continue. So you waited. So that was awesome. Thank you. That's perfect.
Great.
Yeah, that's such a cool program. I love that.
Yes,
nice to have. I feel like that's more common in the Midwest. I'm sure there are a lot of programs here, but I know in Iowa we had a bunch too, but here I haven't heard as many.
Isn't it interesting that, like, for example, boat building programs, there's more here in Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa than there are on the coastlines. There are some out there, like Washington State has a couple and Boston has a couple, but it's ironic that it's happening here in the Midwest.
Yeah, I mean, and I didn't think about that being winter. I know Minnesota winters are so harsh, but you guys have a lot of lakes too.
We do have a lot of lakes during the summer. So, you know, we claim to be the land of 10,000 lakes. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But so during the summer, we have lots of lakes to launch in and rivers to launch in. During the winter, everything's frozen over. So we finally went to the Oxford Pool in St. Paul, and they agreed that we could rent it out one day a week and launch our boats there and teach the kids how to swim. That's the other thing we did there, is
Wow.
because none of them knew how to swim. One of our kids fell into 2 feet of water out of a canoe I was in, and he started playing around like teenagers will, and he fell in. He was in 2 feet of water. I had to get out of the canoe and grab him to tell him to put his legs down and feet down so he could stand up. He was drowning. He had
Oh my
panicked and was
goodness.
drowning.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So were those pools big enough? I'm trying to picture a
Yeah,
big.
the Olympic pool, the Oxford pool is an Olympic pool.
Oh, awesome.
So you could actually paddle, I don't know, for 8 strokes one direction and then turn around and 8 strokes back. And then they could also learn how to turn. We taught them how to use the J stroke. I don't know if you've done canoeing, but how to turn the canoe without just simply changing the side of your paddling. So it was another whole learning opportunity that went on. And many of the kids go on to actually do a lot of boating. We now have got so many kids who are in their 30s. It came in as 15-year-olds, but they're in their 30s or mid 30s now. And we're now doing a better job of tracking the kids that graduated. So
That's awesome. Well, thank you again.
you're
It's
welcome.
been a great experience.
For me also, I should say. I love watching the interpreting. Actually, I'm married to an interpreter, so I love watching it. I wish I knew more. I should be ashamed after 40 years of not knowing more.
Right.
You know, Julie and I were talking about that with our husbands, that
Yeah,
you
They
need
don't
to
know.
start learning with us.
I know. I mean, I get shamed by Patty. I think you saw Patty in the group session.
Mhm.
She's our neighbor here, and
Oh, okay.
she'll sometimes joke with me about the fact that 40 years and you know 7 signs. Are you kidding me?
I'm guessing you know boat.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Exactly. So now do we wait for Lori and then we go back in the group session? Do you know what's going on next?
She should email, send us a message, but
I think we just go back because we can go down and says leave.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there she goes. Do
wrap up the presentation.
you have any
We
other
did.
questions?
I'm all done.
Lindsay, how do you feel about everything? How do you feel about your interpreting or team?
Good. I feel like our discussion last night, because we met over Zoom, so
Oh,
make
great.
sure we had the same expansions and meetings, so that I think, Julie, that really helped
Mm-hmm.
both of us.
I feel like I didn't prepare as much as I did for the other one, and for some reason I feel more confident in this one. But
You
and
could tell.
I was excited that I could bring in depiction. Like we're trying to bring in depiction, which is when you you're making something with your hands instead of sign, or showing it. So about the drinking beer and barbecue.
Yeah.
And then about the part about girls just are very precise and they measure it, and,
Yes.
and the guys are just shoving it. I was
Yeah.
trying to be clear, but I was trying to use space to do it.
No, it was awesome, Julie. You did a great job.
And were
We
you
did.
feeding each other? It seemed like once in a while you were feeding each other. Is that the right word to use?
Yeah.
Actually, feeding is the word. That's what the 2 things we've learned each week: feeding, team interpreting, and depiction. Those are the 2 things she says she wants us to focus on. Oh, and interrupting the speaker.
Yeah, using consecutive and simultaneous blends. So, which we
And
both
more
did.
so- yeah, which more so of interpreting for the exact meaning. She's more so just focus on what we're learning.
Mhm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious what Molly will say, if she, what she understood and what she thought. Because Molly saw my last one too. Oh wait, you saw my last one too, right?
No.
No, you weren't in there. I think Molly was the same consumer for my last presentation, where I was so nervous. I was my finger spelling was
I didn't, by the way, I was watching the interpreting and the finger spelling. I mean, you both look very confident, so that's
Thank
good. In terms of
Well-
the speaker,
well,
Thank
last time my finger spelling was so shaky, but this time I was I don't know. And then I kept forgetting how to sign Minneapolis, and I was
Minnesota. Because he said Minnesota a lot, and then Minneapolis. I know, because we
I
didn't talk about
signed Minneapolis
Minnesota.
from Minnesota every time.
No, it was good. Last night we didn't talk about Minnesota sign. We just talked about St. Paul and Minneapolis, so. But
is
yeah,
this
no.
Minneapolis? I didn't know that, Lindsay. Is this Minneapolis?
Yeah, there's a story behind it. You'll have to ask Lori.
I
But
will.
it's a guy named David, I believe. He kind of, I don't know if he was deaf, but anyway, they created it off his name because he lived in Minneapolis.
Oh,
And so for a D.
sure.
So it
Yeah,
is unique.
yeah,
I
that
like
is unique.
Yeah.
And
All right.
what was the sign for Minnesota? And then I'll let you guys go.
No, you're
MA.
good.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Or MN.
Yeah.
Oh,
MN.
and then?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And
So-
then,
and then St. Paul.
and that's an interesting sign too, because that's the sign for government.
Yeah. Well, that's our state capital. So I suppose that's why they chose that sign.
Just like we do Tallahassee, or
Oh, okay.
I think that might be for everyone's.
In Maine. This is Augusta.
Oh, is
my
that the
gosh.
same thing for Maine too?
I had no idea. Ours is Denver, D. That's our capital.
Because
Well-
So I didn't know that. That's cool. A lot of capitals.
Yeah. So I'll probably leave the room now. I don't think I'm supposed to go back.
we can all. Oh, okay. Well, it's so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Actually, I'll go back first and then let Lori kick me out.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave. I
Nice to
really
meet you
appreciate
both.
it.
And
Nice to
Molly,
meet you.
also you.
Holly, we're going back now.
All right. Thanks. See ya.